So this is from me. So please deliberate. A man cheats on his wife with another woman. What is the proper recompense if he wants to save his marriage? Who should set the terms? And if he does not agree to those terms, what is the proper recompense for termination of this property, i.e., their marriage?
Who's am I supposed to answer this one?
Yes.
Um, okay, first, so you've committed a crime, right? A contractual breach. Um, the and there is a little bit of a cultural difference here in different cultures, but at least in Christian civilization, largely, um, your the marriage vow basically says is for sexual exclusivity and uh, first priority. In other words, you are trying to put that other person's wants and needs ahead of yours. That's what you're both doing, exchanging that. Um, and uh, and dividing the labor of producing a family that will care for you, that will assist you in holding a household while they're adults, maturing, and then upon it being adulthood, insure you. So it's building an insurance, an organization of insurance over time. So in our present mind, since the 70s, marriage has been like an entertainment or friendship thing instead of uh, an economic thing, which is what it was before that. And before that, it was an insurance thing. And before that, it was
Or
literally a survival thing. Go ahead, ask the
as
question.
Eli used to say, uh, gay marriage passed because everyone was getting gay married already.
You know, that's a really smart way of putting it.
Wait, Martin,
Fascinating.
come again?
That gay marriage passed because everyone was getting gay married already.
What he meant is
Everyone's
that
getting gay married already.
marriage is only for sex and entertainment.
Oh, I see. I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Because marriage as an institution has decayed to that point.
right. So marriage originally evolves, pairing off, excuse me, originally evolves because men will kill for it. Um, the one of the reasons we have self-domesticated is because we suppressed alphas by males being able to work together to kill a male who threatened access to their males, to their females. So that's why we have this pairing off thing. And yes, we have lots of cheating, but generally we have pairing off. And the cheating is merely the cheating suppression exists largely to keep the peace by preserving reputations. So we go through these generations of pairing off. Then we get into as I think Engels. This is Engels. The only thing I ever quote of Engels is his work on the family, and his explanation that really, as you get property, then you need to have what we call a family, because property in the past, and then I don't just mean land, I mean assets, and the low productivity of agrarian life, or not only growing things, but raising domesticated animals. That property became your means of survival, and became means of survival of everyone in the family. And then we moved into where we had a more advanced economies. And this ended up being not only that kind of security, but insurance as we developed markets. After that, it just became an economic benefit given the sex differences. And then finally, it became, once the women were able to enter the workforce because of men's development of machinery and automation and institutions, et cetera, once the women are able to enter the same workforce as men, excuse me, instead of the household workforce or craftsman workforce, it's turned into sex and friendship, and so the incentive for traditional marriage has declined. So what that means is the harms have declined. Excuse me, the direct harms have declined. What has increased, though, is the restoration of the indirect harms of not being married. In other words, or violation of the marriage contract, which is the externalization of the costs. You know, and a simple one being, if you have two people in a household, your household is going to be wealthier than if you have two households, each with one income earner. And so, I mean, anybody who's been young and dated and got into the fact that, wow, it's way cheaper for us to live together than it is for us to live separately. This just turns out to be true. So what's happened is you have a decrease in household incomes because of the decrease in the family. And then when you have the current divorce and child support laws we have, you actually make the matter worse because you provide incentive to force a a, a return to independent households, making everybody poorer, or especially the men poorer. So my point here with describing this arc is what are the personal, familial, and social and political costs of the different incentives to be married or not. And so given that those costs have to be fully accounted, um, right, in each time, you still are stuck with fully accounting things, fully accounting all these costs in each era. So the era, the risk to you in 1000 BC was a lot higher than the risk to you today for interference in a marriage. So that's number one, is the cost level. In other words, you can't just say, as a tradition, this is, and summarize it all and pretend the costs are all the same across all time. They're not. If you look at ancient history, for example, the way it generally worked in the legal records I have seen and can testify to is that basically a woman owns her children until they're capable of being independent, which is really, 11 or 12. And 11 or 12, they become the property of the father. And because the father is the person who makes sure that person can now compete in society rather than survive in the family. And so divorces weren't uncommon. Property had to be returned, and that's, dowries, etc. Property had to be returned, and children had to be divided with responsibility. The problem was that, as we can see today, as well as certainly during the pre-industrial revolution, as during the agrarian revolutions, displacements, and certainly during the industrial revolution, is that on children of single mothers export at a high cost on the society, not only because of the poverty and then the need of the poor to try to survive at any cost, but because it fosters low investment parenting, and it exports those moral hazards onto the greater society. All right, so if I've completed that sort of arc of saying, look at these costs are all over the place, what costs are we going to account for? This question asks it on a more interpersonal terms. That's so the reason I'm explaining this is to say, well, if a man cheats on his wife, who's going to set the term? Which fucking terms are we talking about? Are we talking about the personal terms, the interpersonal terms, the children, or the broader society that's affected? So, in essence, what is a marriage contract? It's not just an agreement between the people. It's an agreement between them, and this is why marriages are public, is between the citizens and the parties to the marriage, to not interfere in the marriage, and then therefore not export a cost onto the society as a whole. Does that make sense? Am I making clear that particular case? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's conducting full accounting.
Okay, so So what's happening today, of course, is that we have licensed interference in a marriage. And so when I look at this question, what I see is if he cheats on a, what are the terms? Well, the problem is, who did he cheat with? In other words, woman controls and access to sex. So if he cheated with a woman, she interfered with a marriage. So it's not just between the man, the woman, the man and his wife. It's between the woman who cheated with him, and in doing so, placed a risk on the marriage.
Mhm.
Or it wouldn't matter if it was the other way around. It was the woman who cheated with some other man. So what's the compensation for it is this is when we say there the true cost is so high that it's not open to restitution. Does that make sense?
When you
So
say true cost is so high that it's not open to restitution,
that
you
means you
mean,
actually can't perform restitution. You can punish people, but the damage done is so high by breaking up a marriage, you can't pay you can't actually, it would take so much money to compensate for it that we're generally in a matter of punishment for social good and as much restitution as possible. But generally speaking, the cost of interference in a marriage is more than the asset value of the participants can reasonably dispose of. In other words, it's the most devastating thing that can happen to you,
well,
aside from health.
there's bound to still be a number.
Correct. There's a possible number, but if you were to do a full accounting, it would generally be greater. In other words, to do a full accounting and restitution,
Mm.
what you would end up with is creating a harm. You know what I mean? An even greater harm, because you'd basically make people
Oh, they'll make them bankrupt
right.
easily.
So the problem is more one of punishment and prevention rather than you can't perform restitution, but you can perform some sort of compensation. You can perform punishment and prevention, because those are the three things the court's always deciding. How do I, has someone done a crime or a tort? Has it happened? Is there restitution possible? Is there disincentive possible? In other words, punishment. And is there a disincentive external to the couples, which is called prevention, possible? So, in other words, you want the evidence of the suffering for interference in a marriage to be so high that people don't do it. All right. Now, and the reason, of course, for us to care about this, despite the fact that, yes, lower class people have lower agency and are more likely to be in these problems. People who have high agency and are in the upper classes have generally, in a curve, have more agency. And so you see this, you see that once marriages last a certain amount of time, that there tends to be a class aspect to the durability of marriage. All right, so it's also because of the number of people in the pyramid, so your opportunities and all this other stuff. So in other words, that's complicated. I don't want to distract myself too much from the argument here. So what what we would have is we would have the person who interfered in the marriage would be liable for the harms to the parties in the marriage, namely the woman and the wife in this case. So that person would be liable. The husband would be liable to the wife for some harms to the marriage. And otherwise, the matter that we call child support shouldn't exist It should be whoever takes the children takes responsibility for them, caring them when they have them. There should be no transfer of money, and there should be no alimony, at least today, because there's no economic or insurance factors. So if a man cheats on his wife with another woman, what is the proper recompense if he wants to save his marriage? It's basically an accounting. If you would say that you would do it like any other crime or tort, is what is the damage to this? You'd calculate it, and you'd take the woman who cheated with the man, and you would distribute whatever that was to the woman, and then that would be the end of it. And I think that's what you're asking. And when you say who sets the terms, well, if you set the terms ahead of time, the court should respect those terms, right? I mean, I've been married 3 times. I'd get married 3 more times if I could. I love women. But, I also understand with each divorce, the likelihood of the next divorce increases quite a bit. I mean, substantially, really. So if I said, I would expect a woman who wanted to marry me again to not want to, surrender a lot of assets to me if our marriage didn't work out. And I think that marriage contracts over assets should take priority over assets if we want to voluntarily dissolve. If we involuntarily dissolve, in other words, somebody cheats, then I think you're in a problem. Now, that's the second layer. The third layer is, pretend we're in France. Everybody cheats all the time. It's somewhat like Italy, where the men can cheat, the women do too, but it can't ever be known. In other words, the social harm can't exist, because in the Latin cultures, family is traditional instead of in the Germanic cultures, where family is absolute nuclear. And so the family is where in the north, where we had the Germanic cultures, we had a lot of social insurance along these ways. In other words, everybody took care of each other in the social area, in the village or whatever, especially within the domain of the manor. I always mispronounce the word domain of the manor. Whereas in the Latin countries, they had a great deal of political uncertainty and a great deal of turmoil. I mean, it's Latin culture. And Italy, of course, is a fucking catastrophe forever. I mean, in a silly sort of way, which still continues to this day. So you have the family as the more stabilizing institution, carrying the more responsibility. And so this is one of the reasons we have such a conflict with, we had a conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics, and the Protestants largely being Germanic Protestants, and the Catholics largely being Latin or Latin derived, because there was a huge difference in the class structure of these societies. And it's the same problem we have with Muslims, Jews, and Gypsies, is that the institutional framework they depend upon is not the same institutional framework we depend upon. So when you get into this question, you have to say, well, I'm answering the question in the context of Germanic Protestant absolute nuclear families. If I were to answer this question in the context of the traditional family, or the Muslim family, or the Jewish family, or the Gypsy family, I can't address Asia and East Asia and South Asia as in this example as comfortably as I can address those other cultures. So it's not that I'm overlooking them. It's just that I am my comfort with knowing what I'm talking about in those divorce matters in those cultures is not high enough for me to make claims. So but in the cultures I mentioned, which is ones we're familiar with, the concept, the internal and external costs are higher. However, because the insurance is local, right, instead of social and political, in other words, it's familial or clannish insurance being provided, the tolerance for variation is wider. In other words, it's pretty common in Latin societies to be more emotional, to be more feminine and familial in disposition, and to have more cheating than it is in the Germanic and Protestant tradition. And this mirrors the fact that we're talking about the difference between political and a familial civilizations. So when we talk about this, okay, now how do we get down to who pays the cost? I would say realistically that in modernity, it would be the same thing. In other words, we'd have the same thing. The problem is to a culture that's less developed, the current state of Islam, for example. It's hard to complain about others, but the current state of Islam is they're in the position of having the problem of, you've now harmed the family as a corporation, its reputation, the willingness of other people to intermarry with the family. So, I mean, it's a really big thing in that culture compared to our culture, because our culture is more political and commercial, and theirs is more family and tribal. So we can't expect, we can use the same criteria, we can judge everything by the same criteria, but the harms caused in different cultures because of their stage of development is different. And so you'd have to basically break this down and do a cost accounting by culture, which is fundamentally what cultures have done. So if you look at Islamic treatment of divorce versus Jewish treatment of divorce versus Latin treatment of divorce versus Orthodox treatment of divorce versus Protestant or treatment of divorce, you see the same spectrum as you see with the evolution of the importance of the family as a survival institution over human history. I think I probably beat that one to death by
Yeah,
now.
I think so. So what I conclude from that is it's highly when we conduct full accounting, the throughout different cultures we can use the same categories of
Correct.
internal, external, going from restitution to prevention, internal prevention, external prevention, and so on. But the degree of recompense differs vastly, depends on the stage of the civilizational development. And I
Correct.
think doesn't Islamic society still isn't adultery still punishable by death, especially to the external female interfering in the marriage?
I
It's
can't.
if it's not death, then it's very severe at least.
Well, if you ask the man on the street, because we have interviews of this, a brother will say his obligation is to kill his sister if she cheats, because what she has done is more than just cheat. She has said the family is shit, can't be trusted, and nobody else in that family should be married.
Hmm.
So if you ask the man on the street, and I can actually can visualize this set of interviews right off so clearly, because I can see the guy's face in the doorway answering the question and everything. You'll get that. If you look at the actual legal system, what a legal system does in, say, um, the Saudis versus the Jordanians versus the um, Lebanese. I mean, Lebanon's was a Christian country before that. Versus the say Anatolians, what we call Turks. I mean, the difference is quite substantial from group to group, because these groups are quite substantially different in their states of social and political development. So I can't. While under Islam, yes, that's true. The fact is that people do get divorced pretty often in Turkish civilization, and in the Russian provinces, my understanding it's the same. They've even outlawed what's the what they call kidnapping, and bride napping, whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called. They've even outlawed bride napping in quite a few Islamic countries within the past 20 years. I can't remember I'm thinking of one in particular. I can't remember which stan it is that outlawed it back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. So they're not allowing for bride kidnapping. You know, we talk about bride kidnapping as if it's involuntary. That's not really what it is or ever was, right? You go kidnap this girl because you guys don't have the money to pay a dowry, or you can't get permission, right? And then they take her back to you, kidnap the girl, bring her back to your home, and now you have so many days for the women in your family to convince that woman to marry you. But as my understanding most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it's like we need to elope, and this is the way it's done.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna say that sounds a lot like eloping.
yeah, it's just eloping. But it's got a long tradition. Um, so it's just eloping but by this act, then I think should be clear. No family is to blame, right? So in other words, there's no honor at stake here. It's
Because
such
of the kids behaving like kids.
right. It's just funny. I know if you look at it as if you take it as from a Western person's perspective on face value, it sounds horrible. But if you understand what's really going on, it's just a practical solution to a problem for people who are largely originated as step herders. So
It's my understanding that Stockholm syndrome is pathologization of something that's completely normal for women. That women love being kidnapped.
I know the sex research says that's true, Martin. I feel like Brad right now, and when I say something that I don't want to agree with, even if I know it's true, I'm just gonna just drink my coffee because that's what he does to me all the time.
Okay, I think we beat that one to death. Thank you.
No, we have to address an extenuating circumstance. What if
Oh no, is this serious, Brad? Is this Martin? Is this serious? Or are you messing around now?
I'm messing around, but it's serious? What if the wife preceding cheating was refusing to pay the marriage debt?
Say that again.
Wait, so you mean if it's
She
a
was
wife that
refusing
cheats?
to have sex.
Oh, if the wife refused to,
Yes.
okay, so essentially if the wife originated by refusing to fulfill the terms of the marriage and then the man cheats.
Yes.
Well, realistically, if the wife's fulfilling to fulfill the marriage contract, she's breaking the contract. So get a divorce, right? If she's not fulfilling, because unfortunately, I've used this. I hate being married 3 times because it makes me look bad. But the thing is, I've been in enough for long-term relationships and marriages that I can say, well, I've just done this with all these women and it works. And I said, what would happen to you if you couldn't talk to your girlfriends and exchange emotional discourse with them at all? Like all you could do was go to work in silence and not have any of that emotional connection. You'd have a fucking nervous breakdown, right? Magnify that by 10, and that's what it's like for a man to not get laid. It's the same. It's the same connection, but from an interpersonal sexual versus interpersonal social standpoint. So the problem is that women discount men's sexual needs because they put it on their terms, and men tend to discount a little bit women's intersocial needs. the truth is that as unusual, men accept women's intersocial needs, and women often don't accept men's intersexual needs. And so you get this problem, which is, in other words, I'm just saying that Martin's being a smartass by interjecting something that's actually humorous, but is actually true, is that if you don't have that relationship of the man providing emotional support for the woman and the woman providing sexual support for the man, you don't have a marriage. If you don't have that. And so I would say that's a basic necessity that's assumed throughout history. And it's actually, I mean, there's a great law in Seattle. I don't know if you know this one, Francis. There's the great thing about the common law is this shit stuff stays on the books forever. God, that's a beautiful cat, Martin. But in Seattle, you have to brush your teeth after eating sardines before you have sex with your wife.
There's a law.
There's a law for that.
Is it a city code or is it like a
I
state
can't remember
law?
if it's a city or a state. I'm pretty sure it's city. So I mean, back when the internet was just smart guys or the CompuServe, you could find this stuff relatively easily, but now with all the advertising and shit, you can't see this stuff. But there were guys who would collect this kind of crap. So anyway, I can't remember if that one, I got that one from, who I got that one from. It might be, what's his name, Adams, but anyway, that's, I've known that forever. I just thought it was funny. And it makes sense, right? You're not kissing me after eating sardines, right? Or garlic or whatever like that. But the fact that it would end up in a courtroom, right? That there would be a dispute between a man and a woman. It's just, I'm not fucking him unless he brushed his teeth after, or as I started. I just think that's fun, but that's so white. I mean, I just, it's such a white people thing. It just kills me. And of course, Seattle's Scandinavian, right? So Seattle is largely founded by lumberjacks. We're talking illiterate lumberjacks too, by the way. I guess this whole thing makes a lot of sense. But anyway, there's that kind of law out there. So how did I get on that joke? I got on, because Martin was asking the question of, what do you do? Well, if you withhold sex, then, you're basically violating the marriage contract. That doesn't mean you get it every day and whatever, but, it's not, for men, sex is not a want, it is a need, for the same reason that for women, emotional interaction, basically any kind of attention, is not just a want, it's a need. And women will cheat more. Women will actually cheat more frequently for that emotional stimulation than men will cheat for sexual deprivation. Which is wonderful. We have all this data now on why people do these things, and so we don't have to hypothesize anymore. So, Martin, did I answer your question or not?
Yes.
So, okay. I'm watching Francis decide if he's going to give us another question or not.
Nope. I'm just applying what I heard to the two cases that I know of. So this is a bit on the side. The reason I asked this question is because a friend of ours, this couple who we witnessed their marriage. In fact, I was the wedding photographer. That's the situation they're going through. And at first, I thought, because the husband cheated, the fault is on the husband, and the wife needs to set the terms. But then, based on our explanation, I realized, like, because women holds the how did you put it? Access to sex, right? There's, in fact, this third party, this other woman that he cheated with, also is also at fault. But then another couple, now that they're already divorced, but another friend of ours a couple of years ago, it was the wife who cheated. And I don't know all the details, but I suspect the husband was probably not providing the emotional support that she needed that caused her to cheat. But then in this case, 2 wrong does not make right.
No, I mean, the whole thing is, is today, if you don't want to be married, don't be married. All right, don't be married anymore. The problem is most of us want to, what do you call it, monkey branch? It's called monkey branching. We want to go from a relationship to another, right? We want to be certain in a new relationship before we break up the last one. Cheating is not,
Well,
if you love your wife. I don't understand it, but I do understand it if you don't love her any longer. Same thing for
I happen to be the wedding photographer. I do photography as a hobby. It's just totally
Mhm.
amateurish. I happen to be the photographer at both of these weddings. So I guess
Yeah.
the moral of the story here is if you want your marriage to last, then don't ask me to become your wedding photographer.
Well, you have a
Because
statistical
two to
probability.
two, it's just like 100%.
That's terrible. Well, I mean, your chances of a first marriage failing in that demographic, in other words, your region of the country in that age group, chances of a first marriage failing are very high, right? So